let's talk about this 1992 CR 500 and just a little bit of the history with this particular bike and myself. So let's rewind to about 10 years ago. I actually bought this bike off of Facebook Marketplace from a kid about 2 hours away from me with a blown up motor. At the time, I was helping Paul out over at Fab Rats a lot doing demolition derby stuff. He got wind that I'd made the deal on the bike and he wanted to ride over with me to pick the bike up. Well, before we got back to his house, he had talked me into selling him this bike, and for a buddy, I did that because I wanted to see him on a CR 500, and the rest was kind of history.
Man, it's been a minute since I've seen that old girl.
Oh, last time I rode it, you seen it.
I owned that bike for about, what, 2 hours?
However long it took to get from Duck Creek to home.
Yeah.
He rode this thing for a couple years, and I honestly think it sat for quite a while. Now, fast forward to a year ago, he contacted me and he said that he wanted to take the motor out of this bike and convert it over to an aluminum frame chassis. So I says, absolutely, let's get it done. And so if you guys have been following for a while, you can go back and you'll remember the videos of me building the Fab Rats 500. That's the motor that was out of this chassis.
I need my sunglasses on to look at it.
Goodness gracious.
Look at that. Dude, when I lay this down, I'm gonna cry.
You kind of want to just hang it from the roof of your shop,
I'm telling you what.
Long story short, when I got his bike done, he didn't want this thing anymore, so we made a deal, and now I actually own this bike for a second time in about 10 years. I'm not selling this thing again. It's not going away. I regretted getting rid of this bike from the day that I sold it to Paul. So, what's the plans for this bike? The plans for this bike are up in the air. This is where you guys come in. Should I take this bike and do a full 100% back to stock restoration on it? Or should I do more of a resto mod where it looks period correct-ish, but it has some really good rideable aftermarket parts on it? That's what I want you guys to tell me. Put it down below in the comments, and nobody types like this anymore, but like that, on your phone, and let me know what you do with this thing. But first things first, before we even get started, I got to clean this chassis up because it's pretty grimy and greasy. Then I'm going to show you what I'm going to put back in this thing for a power plant. And that motor has a little bit of a different history. So here's the power plant that's going to go back in this chassis. Obviously, this is a CR 500 motor. So this engine right here has kind of a unique history to the DBF garage. It's an 89 CR 500. I bought the entire CR 500 off of Marketplace, but what is funny about that particular bike is I watched that bike go up for sale multiple times on Facebook Marketplace over the course of about a year. I'm in extreme southern Utah, and the first time I saw it, it was almost to the Idaho border, and about every couple weeks it would sell, and then it would pop up again, and then sell and pop up again, and every time it got sold for less money and came farther south in the state, farther south in the state, farther south in the state. And nobody could actually get this bike to run. And long story short, I got it from a guy that was about 2 hours north of me, and he obviously could not get it to run. I brought the bike home, did some diagnosing on it, and I decided that there was something wrong with the piston inside of it. Sure as heck, pulled the jug off of it, piston was in backwards. Would not run because piston was obviously in backwards. Flopped the piston around, third kick, fired right up, and it ran okay. So the history with this motor is I have used this motor to use as a mock-up engine for pretty much every AF conversion I've done over the course of the last decade. This thing has helped build at least 10 to 12 AF conversions that I've done right here in the garage. And it's also been in the racing lawnmower for a while, which you guys can go watch that video on the channel if you want. It's sketchy, dude.
I can only imagine.
And it never has just ran quite right. I think it's got some major ignition issues, and I think it's tired. I honestly just think it's super, super tired. So what we're gonna do is I'm going to tear this engine apart in this episode and get the crank separated from the lower half, and we're gonna send the jug and the crank off, and I think we're gonna put a Fathead Racing cylinder head on it. So Luke, I'm gonna be getting a hold of you here pretty quick, so you get the old machine fired up, because I need one of your cylinder heads for this thing. So let's get into tearing this motor apart, shall we? Curious to see what the inside of this thing looks like, because last time we had this thing running that was in the mower, this thing got so hot. I mean, it pretty much pushed all the water out of it, and we just fed her the beans the rest of the race, because I mean, why don't you? You know, I mean, why not? So let's get this thing tore down, get the carb and everything off of it, and we'll get the jug off of it, and at least get that far today to see what this thing looks like inside. Some of those head stud bolts or nuts were not super tight. Makes this feller worry a little. And inside of the cylinder looks great though. Well, there you can see how much time I've put on this thing since I got it running. When I took the cylinder off and flipped the piston back around the right direction, I scraped it right here to see what the bore size was, and I haven't ran it long enough to actually coke that back up, so didn't run a ton after I got it running, but we did run it quite a bit, I guess. I don't know, but not enough to cover that. Next, we pull the 4 bolts and a little bit of the plumbing off this thing, and slide the old jug off the block and see what the jug looks like. Hopefully it's not bad. It can still be machined out. I don't know why it couldn't. Always use a soft face mallet when you're giving the old Tanya Harding to the cylinders on these. Don't ever use something hard. You don't want to break bones, you know? And yes, I'm that old to know who Tanya Harding is. Oh yeah. There she comes off of there. Definitely needs to be bored. But it still ran. Doesn't look like it can't be saved. So split the cases to get the crank out on this thing, and the actual rear swing arm bolt bushing sometimes gets corroded in there. So what you have to do is you have to take and heat this up right here with your little bit of heat, little MAP gas torch or whatever you're choosing, and expand that case a little bit. That way the bushing doesn't hang up and the case will come apart evenly. Come on, baby, come loose. There we go. Ta-da! That actually came apart pretty easy. So now what I'm gonna do, flip it back over, push the other side of the case through the crank bearing, and we're ready to ship off some engine parts. Well, there you go. The old motor's scattered. I got all individual parts categorized in these plastic totes. So when the time comes to go clean and exchange bearings and seals and all that, I'm not hunting for parts. When I go to reassemble this thing, it makes it a lot easier. Now back to the bike itself. Like I said earlier, I don't know if I'm gonna go full restoration on this thing or if I'm gonna do more of a resto mod. I do know that there are some parts on this bike that I will not be able to source, or will be very hard to source, that are factory parts, so I'll have to use some aftermarket, parts on this thing. Like for instance, the suspension, the rear shock needs to be rebuilt. I want to upgrade the valving in the rear suspension. The front suspension on this thing is absolutely toast. It is just trashed. In fact, one of the lower fork tubes itself is actually bent, and every time you go over and compress the forks, they hang up and they don't rebound like they're supposed to. They leak like crazy. And the lower triple clamp on the fork setup, the stop is actually broke on one side. So more than likely, this bike is gonna get a modern style set of front forks and triple clamps. But I'm gonna try to keep this thing as stockish as possible, maybe just a touch of aftermarket. Maybe I'm thinking I'm gonna build this thing like I would have done back in 1992 when it was brand new with aftermarket parts. I don't know. You guys decide, and you guys tell me how you, if this was your bike, how you would put this bike together and what you would use. Now, you know me, I'm a big CR500 guy. I love them. I have been taking CR500 motors out of iron frames and putting them in aluminum frames a lot for the last decade. To be right honest with you, I'm tired of doing that. I'm tired of seeing these classics disappear. I think these are a much cooler and a lot more unique bike nowadays than a AF or an aluminum frame conversion bike. They're fun to ride. I love my aluminum frame bikes. They run good, they handle good. But that being said, I'm kind of regretting tearing apart some of these older bikes. So this is my way of trying to make things right in the universe just a little bit by restoring a couple iron frame CR500s. Now don't forget, I've got the old 87 over in the corner. I'm still hunting down a few parts that is kind of turning out to be a pain to find. So you guys will be seeing a lot more of that bike in some upcoming videos. So as always, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you all next time.